Welcome to another episode of the LSAA podcast. Today we want to talk about the pharma package, as it is called, the proposed pharma legislation for the EU. It's a very complex topic with a lot of different aspects, and everybody agrees complexity is one of the biggest challenges. And we have with us today Jan-Philipp Beck, who hopefully can shed some light on that. His background as former CEO of EIT Health, he has worked across Europe with EU institutions for many years, and as a partner of Vintura, a consulting company these days, he's hopefully in a position to explain to us what the major barriers and challenges are of the proposed legislation. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Rainer. Great to be here.
Thank you for coming and joining us and giving us your time. So let's take a look first at a sort of core element. We've prepared some visualization of sort of the heart of the proposed legislation. This is a visualization where we are currently with the incentives, which are the core feature of the pharma legislation that drives the attractiveness for investments in Europe, which of course is one of the key concerns of the venture capital community that we represent. When you look at the top, you see the current situation, which means there's 10 years of regulatory data protection, plus 2 years that gives companies time to recoup the substantial investments that are made in especially orphan drugs in this case. And you can see in the bars underneath how things are supposed to change. One of the more scary parts is that well-established use orphan drugs would be reduced to 5 years as not just the base, but basically that is it. And then when you have orphan drugs and high unmet medical needs orphan drugs, then you're looking at 9 years base, 10 years base. And on top of that, you see that there are incentives, 1 year for this, 1 year for that, and they're all based on conditions that companies have to meet. So that is quite a reduction for those companies who are thinking of putting their money, investing in research and development for those kinds of drugs. So that is the specific part of orphan drugs. When you look at the overall, we have a similar situation. Currently, we have 8 years plus 2 plus 1, and it will go down from 8 years regulatory data protection down to 6 years. And then again, with conditions, you can earn back some time that would allow you to be unchallenged in the market. The bottom section is what we have proposed and what we think is a very pragmatic approach. We say from an investment perspective, especially when you look overall at the situation in Europe, where it's not just this incentive regime, but it's also the overall lack of capital available for venture capital. There's all kinds of regulatory burdens and hurdles that are making it difficult for companies to be successful and profitable in a short period of time. When you look at the lack of liquidity in the capital markets for exits, for IPOs of companies in Europe, you see that how that whole package of attractiveness is changing. So our proposal is keep what you have and add the new incentives, the conditional incentives on top that would make a more attractive proposition for investors. So that's a very sort of quick snapshot for those who are interested. And of course, it's an oversimplification, but it is something to start from to give our viewers a bit of an insight. With that, I would pass it over to you if you want to add something to especially this slide, Jan.
So thank you very much, Rainer, for producing this overview. I think that's very helpful. Of course, it's also the first very substantial overhaul of this legislation, I think, in the past 20 years. And what concerns me is that I haven't heard from the stakeholders, be it smaller companies, larger ones, or investors, anything really enthusiastic about this package, right? And that's very worrying. And I think your slide shows very clearly why that is. It introduces a lot of risk and uncertainty and potentially a worsening of conditions. And I think we should we should talk about what the root causes of this are, but then also see what could be done to, on the one hand, bring about maybe something around the suggestions that you have made. Maybe there's also some additional pieces that need to be done at member state level, I think, to actually come to improvements of the framework conditions.
Thank you. Then I think we should spend more time now focusing on what does it mean for SMEs? What does it mean for especially young pharma companies? How do they deal with this new level of complexity? There are so many conditions that are attached to earning back market exclusivity protection. How does it work for them, actually? Even big pharma companies say this is really difficult. And as far as I understand, hardly anybody ever really endeavored to, for example, launch a product across 27 member states in the EU.
Very good question. First of all, I'm not aware actually of a simultaneous launch in all 27 member states. Of course, we should first of all maybe consider that the ambition that the Commission has here in terms of also improving times to access for patients is a valid one. It's totally legitimate. If we look at the times that patients often wait between countries like Germany or many others, especially Eastern European countries, it's a situation that of course increases pressures. And when I look at that, I try to walk in the shoes of a European policymaker or the Commission, obviously this is something you would want to change. But coming back to your question, I think we need to understand how does this work in practice for big companies, but especially also for small ones. And usually what you do is, and that's at the core of business and also go-to-market model of smaller companies, and that's what we see in the market, is that you usually launch in one country or a few countries first. Often that's what we call your home market. That's where you form partnerships. That's often where you have done also some of your clinical studies. That's where you have maybe a best idea also on how you can go to market, how you can reach your customers, what your distribution channels might be. And of course, also these might be markets that offer initially higher prices. And that's where you go first. And from there, over time, you move to other markets. Now, so I think the simultaneous launch provision is one piece that's really difficult. Another one is, I think it's understandable that the Commission wants to incentivize that medicines are, of course, developed and launched that really address unmet needs, so that they solve problems for patients that are not solved sufficiently now. But I believe that the new definitions that are now introduced, they bring uncertainty on how they should actually be read, interpreted, and applied. And uncertainty is never good for calculating business cases and soliciting investment. And then finally, I think overall, what the EU is risking to do now is that within a change in regulatory policy, it might actually just hit the bottom line of those small companies in order to press for faster access. And even if that works in some cases, it will certainly worsen the business case of companies compared to the status quo. And I think ultimately that is not going to help anyone as we move forward.
We've also said that the requirement for the simultaneous launch across the EU is having another side effect, and you described one, which is quite serious one. But if you can't go on your own, you have to basically find somebody who is buying your product for a launch across the EU. Or if you're licensing it, you are looking for somebody who is in a position to actually do that. I was just in Paris at HDRD, and a representative of a large pharma company said it's even a challenge for us. It is difficult to make a good business case for it. So what we see from an investment perspective is that, of course, pricing will go down for companies that will go with the full sort of 27 member state launch approach, looking for somebody who's buying the whole thing in one fall and basically planning to launch across the EU. That will drive down prices, and therefore it will limit how much companies can earn new money, fresh money to invest in different new medications, new innovation, or just expanding the company, which is really a substantial drawback.
I think that's ultimately what could happen. So if you would really want to follow through with that ambition to go for a full launch in all countries, it might indeed simply be impossible for a small company to do that. And we can go back also to those root causes for this as they currently exist. But indeed, you may see that only larger companies might be in a position to do so. Now, at first, you might think, okay, maybe that strengthens the position then of large pharma, if they could succeed with such launches. But honestly, I do not really think also there that there's a win there. First of all, the business case cannot also be calculated well for larger companies, but also we always have to remember that much innovation also comes from those smaller companies, and we need the investment there. It's also very important in the end for large pharma that sector thrives, right? That's very important. And I think SMEs, as a key driver for innovation in Europe, they play that major role. For example, from all medicines from SMEs that were recommended for marketing authorization between sort of in the early 2000s, even up to the, I think, 2020. 1 and 2 contained really new substances. 42% were for rare diseases. So the pipeline of SMEs in Europe is critically important, and we should not threaten their innovative capacity, I think.
I was also in a conversation where a representative of a pharma company said that they're concerned about the consequences for pricing if they launch across the EU in 27 countries. They mentioned the reference pricing as a bit of a threat, that they, in the end, would end up with the worst possible price, and therefore, of course, the worst possible recovery of the substantial investment. And the latest number that I've seen was published is that a new drug is basically $6 billion investment, $6 billion investment as an average number almost to really get it to the market. So if you can't recoup, then you don't have the funds to invest in new, and therefore innovation will dry out or at least suffer.
Yeah, and I think what might be something that is missing at the moment in the European perspective here in that proposal is that this is of course not a Europe only affair, but there's global competition, and there's also global competition for venture capital, right? And I think that especially in Europe, we are already suffering from I think you said it in your introduction, we suffer from a relatively low availability also of funds. So if we want companies to still grow here and also to go to market here and to, let's face it, also create jobs here and help our overall economic development, we need to make sure that they can also compete as an investment case. And this is not helping. And I believe that the price we risk to pay here might be extraordinarily high. So we are choosing, I think, regulation here as a tool to fix a problem that should be fixed in other ways, right? And that cannot be fixed with the tools that we are applying now.
Yeah, that's true. Good point. Now, we've talked quite a bit about the simultaneous launch requirement, but there are other conditions attached to winning back some market protection. They also present their own challenge. They increase the cost for companies. They are putting a strain on simply also the managerial capacity, because you can't just delegate that. And actually, it was interesting. A representative of the Commission said to me, you can buy the market launch. You can go to an external provider and they can launch for you and handle all that across all 27 member states. And I said, I don't think anybody can do that right now. And I don't think any company would actually be prepared to take that job on. And even if so, you would still have a drain on management on the SME side, because somebody has to more or less control this, manage this, and work with the external provider. So how do you see the other conditions and also the definitions, unmet medical need, high unmet medical need? A lot of it is really not very clear, isn't it?
Yeah, so let's take it maybe in two steps. One, still following it back on the complexity of launch essentially, and how you can done it and how you can do it, and what's also important to succeed. And then secondly, yeah, what other kind of curveballs are thrown, if you like, through the challenging definitions around unmet need. So I think first, so at Vintura, we do work on market entry and launch strategies with small companies, with larger ones. I think we have a good deal of experience on how that works in practice. And with all due respect, it might be really a simplification of your conversation partner to say you can simply buy a launch. It's not a linear process. It's not something that you just can execute by the book. There are a lot of different dynamics. And let's say the market authorization piece is just the very first step. Then you do not only have complex processes around establishing price and moving towards reimbursement, but also going through value assessment, right? HTA essentially, and looking for alignment of value and price. But then there's the whole question around health system readiness, as we often say, right? Is there actually the budget available? Do we have infrastructures and pathways in place? For example, if there's a really advanced and novel drug, do I actually have the diagnostics in place to identify the patient population? We have, with many new medicines, you will need genomic profiling in order to identify patients. Is that actually available? So you have questions like this that need to be tackled. And of course, there are then multiple layers in the decision-making process also within a country, often regional. So lots of difficulties, even in one country, that often require a bespoke approach. But then it's not the same, obviously, in all 27 member states. This is all member state domains, and how you move through these different steps depends very much on the member state. And so that's around launch. So a lot of challenges. It's costly. It needs to be managed, and it's also relationships need to be built there. So that requires also, for a company, for example, I believe you need to be present. So I think it's really hard, if you really want to launch yourself, not to be there at all. So that's one thing. And then indeed about I think there are established in HTA frameworks now. There are, of course, established definitions of unmet need, and now the Commission is also including new elements. For example, around addressing specifically severe conditions and so on. So there's room for interpretation, and I think we need to see would need to see how this would be interpreted, and this alone introduces a lot of uncertainty, which I think is unnecessary. And then one more piece, I think one can doubt also whether the let's say the tightening of some of these definitions around unmet need, whether that is really so necessary, or whether we might also risk here that a lot of good innovations might actually not be brought to market that could have a significant impact on patients. So lots of challenges on that side.
Yeah, I mean, especially from an investor perspective, uncertainty is really, really bad, because it impacts the investment decision. And what policymakers tend to forget is that venture capital is not owner of that money. They have limited partners that put the money into the funds, and they have a fiduciary responsibility to make informed decisions. And if the uncertainty impacts that, then it's very hard to make an investment case. And in the end, money may flow elsewhere. So that doesn't help anybody. And also what I've said several times, if we want to build an industry, if you want to have a life sciences industry in Europe that is a strong pillar and provider of wealth for the whole EU, then you have to look at it from an opportunity perspective and not just on the cost side and trying to sort of make it easy and maybe cheaper for the social security systems. And that is exactly where there's a dichotomy, because we have the silos in Brussels where the different directorate generals, of course, have their own mandate, and they are not always looking at the broader picture, which is a big challenge. When we look at that overall package, I've been told at least several times there's also a lot of good in there. What is it that you would see as positive that is a part of the proposed legislation?
So as I said before, the ambition overall, I think, is good to narrow that gap. So I think that's a good one. I think there could be no matter what. So even if we still hopefully manage or to see an adjustment in those incentive frameworks, I think the mechanism as such to maybe reward, not only to reward companies for faster launch, it could be what if it could lead to countries maybe also adjusting their systems and reforming them and accelerate also processes. Perhaps we could also see that different countries maybe that have similar, let's say, economic capabilities might align more, and maybe they would align more around their HTA procedures and maybe also their approach to pricing negotiations. And that in turn, if that could be an effect, would be desirable, would make it easier then for companies also to launch. So I think that could be definitely an important part. We haven't touched now much on the question on how can we incentivize also the research into AMR, so new antibiotics that could combat antimicrobial resistance. I think it's good that the Commission is taking that up and trying to develop also incentives in that regard. So those are a few things. So I think it's addressing, let's say, the right problems. It has the right problems in view, but let's say the calibration is not right at the moment.
Yeah, one of the things that is seen as positive, especially by the Commission, is that on AMR you can earn a voucher. And the voucher would be applicable to any other drug you are having that would then benefit from it, because you can use the voucher to extend the lifespan of one of your blockbusters. I said in a meeting, I said, okay, an SME typically doesn't have a pipeline of numerous drugs and definitely doesn't have another blockbuster. They are in the stage of trying to get there. So how much is it really actually worth to have this voucher? And then when you look from an investment perspective, the AMR, you typically have sort of an earnings limit in there anyway, because a lot of them is a reserve antibiotic that would be used if everything else fails, in a sense. So it's really tricky to make that work and make a really good investment case out of it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and maybe that's a bit more big pharma thinking there. So indeed, and that brings me also to another aspect that we need to consider, which you just mentioned, is that of course also overall in principle small companies really have small portfolios or no portfolio at all. They might have a single drug they want to bring to market, and that is so all eggs are in one basket. And that of course also with this framework, with the uncertainties sort of along the way, makes it, let's say, extra risky, because you don't really have anything else in the bag, so to say, that you could balance with. So this is an additional challenge here for small companies. So overall, I think that's something we can, I think, rightly say about this this package that it is surprising, it's simply surprising that the Commission, with all its ambition also to support innovation and entrepreneurship also of smaller companies, it hasn't taken better care of that. I mean, I remember from my past in EIT Health, I mean, organizations like EIT Health were created also to close that gap between research in Europe, where we are still, I think, fantastic, and commercialization. And we know all this rhetoric about these valleys of death and so on. And then we quickly come to that issue that we don't have enough venture capital and we don't have enough investor confidence in Europe and all of these things. And now this legislation really doesn't help. And I think you can even, if you wanted to, we could broaden the picture. I mean, we have a number of European files there at the moment, also Data Act. We have the questions around AI. We have the things on the European health data space where we see a lot of potential. And you could group some of this now together and say, what is all of this doing to Europe's innovation capacity, and specifically for smaller countries? And I think we are missing the opportunity to actually give us a major push in the right direction here, because these packages are also not they're not renewed. It's a major effort to renew them. So once they're there, it's going to take time to touch them again. So it's almost like it's a one shot that will probably set us on a certain course for the next few decades to come. And we ought to get it right, so that we need still some significant improvements, I think. And then one more piece, maybe. What does concern me also a little bit is that there is not sufficient awareness yet about at least in my view, about the challenges that this creates. So also from conversations with companies, I do think that there is still not enough awareness of what's coming, also at the member state level, also low. Let's go to health clusters and all these wonderful groupings that are thinking about innovation. What's happening there at the moment is not, I think, top of the agenda necessarily enough. And I believe that it's important now to engage also in conversation at member state level, because the governments will still influence this as well. We have elections coming up in Europe, so it will be important to engage with parliamentarians. So I think this topic belongs on top of mind, top of agenda, to still see how we can refine this and also, make maybe also some suggestions then on how we could improve. Also at member state level, because I think your suggestions for the legislation, I think they are very clear and good ones. But honestly, we also need to see how can we improve inside the countries to solve the problem of patient access ultimately.
Yeah, totally. I fully agree. So thank you very much for your insights. I think it was a very good view on the package, and very sort of from the forefront in a sense. And for my part, before we close, what we see is the focus is very much on defensive, is very much on risk management. It is not looking at opportunities. And I've said in several meetings, I said, nothing ventured, nothing gained. We need to start looking at venture as an opportunity rather than a risk. So hopefully we will see improvements in the package going forward over the next, I don't know, some say several months, others say several years, before it is final, and will, as you said, basically establish the framework for quite a few number of years and a lot of development steps in the EU. And
let's get out of thinking access and innovation as trade-offs purely, right? I think that is something we really need to resolve. I think they can go hand in hand, and the regulatory framework can facilitate that, right? That you see more innovation and more dynamic development in the sector. And we can also then see how we can improve patient access for sure. But the tools I think that we have chosen here are not perfectly fit just yet. So we should improve.
Thank you very much for those final words. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for our viewers for watching and hopefully taking a few additional points with them. And let's all work towards a better future. Thank you.
Thank you, Rainer.